Hi guys, my name is Michael O'Neill. I'm a realtor here in Houston, Texas, and today I'm going to be going over an article that I read every day, and it's Yahoo Finance Housing Bubble 2.0. And this basically is talking about a lot of comparisons to what happened in 2007 and 2008 compared to what we're seeing in the data that's being reported every day today. If you're watching the news, if you're paying attention to what's happening with the Federal Reserve, every time they speak on it, something changes. And today I'm going to go over some of the data points that we saw back in 2007, 2008, and kind of get my opinion on what I think's happening, what we're seeing in the local markets versus what the data is telling us and what other professionals are saying in the market. When the U.S. housing bubble burst more than a decade ago, it brought a global economy to its knees. It turned out that the multi-year housing boom to the early 2000s was hiding a lot of skeletons. Home buyers driven by fear of missing out on home price gains, which is a lot of what we're seeing today is the fear that you're going to miss out on an opportunity. They were stretching themselves thin, well beyond their financial means. Overzealous lenders were giving out mortgages, or at that time they were subprime mortgages to folks who really couldn't afford them. They were rushed in to help to drive the housing boom. However, the housing market was corrected. Those bad loans created a foreclosure crisis that took many of the nation's financial firms like Bank of America and Citigroup, to the breaking point. Fast forward today, where the U.S. housing market is once again going through a historic housing boom. Over the past 2 years, U.S. home prices are up 34.4%, including a 19% jump over the last 12 months. That 12-month hike is more than 4 times greater than the historic annual average at 4.6, posted ever since 1987. It's also well above the largest 12-month price jump of 14.7%, posted in the years leading up to the 2008 crisis. In my opinion, what this article is starting to talk about is it's getting into the fundamentals of what was happening and the differences in the 2007, 2008 with subprime lending versus what you have today with more restrictions. And some professionals are saying that it won't happen like it did in 2007, 2008 because they have restrictions in place to protect the consumer and also the lender. When you're handing out these mortgages. Back then, you could get a mortgage just by putting something down on paper, and there was not as much red tape to go through. And that ultimately caught up with some of the bigger banks that were spending billions and billions and billions of dollars just giving out mortgages where ultimately they knew that the consumer couldn't afford if something were to happen. And that's what we're going to be talking about today, the differences in what we're seeing in today's market. Are there some comparisons? Are there not comparisons? This is just an opinion piece. This is an article I'm reading from Yahoo Finance. This is strictly my opinion. I'm a real estate agent. This is, you need to do your own research. I sell real estate in the Houston area, and I'm the local professional. I feel confident in the Houston market. I'm going to explain why I feel confident in the Houston market. The article continues. Our ongoing housing boom has more economists pondering the most feared word in real estate, which is a bubble. In March, researchers at the Federal Reserve Bank of Dallas sent chills down the spines of home builders and real estate agents when they released a paper titled Real-Time Market Monitoring Finds Signs of a Brewing U.S. Housing Bubble. The Dallas Fed researchers found home prices are becoming detached from the economic fundamentals of household incomes. However, if a housing correction does come to pass, the Dallas Fed researchers don't think it would cause the macroeconomic issues like we saw from the last housing bubble, just like we were just talking about. Unlike the last go around, they write household balance sheets today appear in better shape, and excessive borrowing doesn't appear to be fueling the housing market and the market boom. One thing I'll say about that is excess balance sheets versus what happened in the past. There's a lot of stimulus money that still hasn't been spent. So when they say that, they're looking at everyday savings accounts in your average consumer's bank account versus what it was even 3, 5, 4 years ago. And they're saying that's a pretty steady and pretty solid comparison to that. That said, some regional housing markets could be in full-blown housing bubbles. At the very least, many markets are priced super high compared to the local income levels and support. The levels can support. That's what the Fortune found after looking at an analysis by the real estate initiative at Florida Atlantic University. Each month, researchers at the university calculate overpriced and underpriced homes in America's 100 largest housing markets. In their own words, here's how the Florida Atlantic University researchers say to read their housing analysis. A positive score represents a premium, implying that the average property in a metro is selling above its historical implied price. A negative score represents a discount, implying that the average property in a metro is selling below its historically implied price. In my opinion, what they're telling everybody is, compared to the historically priced, what's happened in the past versus what's happening today, they are telling us that researchers think that the pricing of homes are overpriced in most markets, and in some markets more than others. Continuing, at the latest reading in March, Florida Atlantic University researchers found every one of America's 100 largest housing markets overpriced relative to the economic fundamentals in the market would support. That includes 44 markets overpriced at least 30% and 13 overpriced at least 50%. The most overpriced markets are Boise by 75%, Austin by 66%, and Ogden, Utah at 63%, Las Vegas 60%, and Atlanta at 60%. Those places have all seen an influx of new residents amid the pandemic's work from anywhere boom. That in part explains why home prices there have soared well above the local incomes can afford. It also raises the question, if a 2023 recession does come and employers finally have the economic power to force staffers back into the office, will those housing markets be at a higher risk of the home price correction? To find the local housing markets that are most fairly priced relative to the household incomes, just look for places that saw an exodus of workers during the pandemic. Case in point, the metros of New York City and San Francisco are overpriced by just 3% and 13% respectively. Again, in my opinion, what this is telling you is there's a little worry in the marketplace from some of the researchers and analysts that if everything goes back to more of a normalcy market, will employers pull their employees back into the marketplace? An example would be, what if they feel like their production is not high enough and they want to go back to what it used to be? Will they pull those employers back into the office? If they do that, that's an example. If somebody had to leave Boise, Idaho, and try to sell their house, go back to California or New York, wherever they were at, how are they going to sell their $800,000 house that they pay for in Boise, Idaho, when a lot of the buyers that were purchasing with that purchase power at the time are out of the market and the local income levels don't support the home prices? What kind of issue could this create on a national scale? Moving on, what's notable about the ongoing housing boom is the Whiplash Effect. Just 2 years ago, the housing market was reasonably priced relative to incomes. See the chart that's above. In March 2020, only 9 housing markets were overpriced by 10%, according to the Florida Atlantic University's calculation. Back then, Spokane, Washington, overpriced by 26%, was the most overpriced housing market. As of March 2020, Spokane is now overpriced by 55%, which doesn't even put it in the top 5, while 90 out of the nation's 100 largest markets are overpriced by 10% or more. At first glance, one might assume the COVID-19 recession dragged down the March 2020 numbers. It didn't. The ratios created by researchers at the Florida Atlantic University were essentially the same in January 2020 as in March 2020. Simply put, March 2020 is a good point of reference. The difference between March 2020 and March 2022 speaks to how historically fierce the housing market has been during the pandemic. The difference between March 2020 and March 2022 speaks to how historically fierce the housing market has been during the pandemic. In a matter of 2 years, we've flipped from a normal housing market into one that is historically overpriced. After reading this clip, I think it's pretty safe to say why so many people are being speculative about the market, about what's fixing to happen, or if some of the analysts are correct in saying it'll be different than the last time, or will this be a whiplash effect? And that's what they're kind of stating here, is nobody knows what's going to happen, but the prices and the surges have been so tremendous and so fast. I think it's pretty safe to say, if you're looking back 10 years from now and something does happen with a crash, why wasn't it being talked about more by reading this article before it happened and looking back 6 months later saying all the indicators were there? Why didn't we learn from historical mistakes? The last housing bubble was anything but even. As the housing market crashed through 2008, overpriced markets like Phoenix and Las Vegas got absolutely crushed. Not only were home prices those markets booming, so was the new construction. But as the market slumped, Phoenix and Vegas became oversupplied with sprawling new subdivisions. That oversupply drove home prices down even faster and made the foreclosure crisis in those markets even worse. This time around, Phoenix and Vegas are once again among the most overpriced housing markets. In March 2007, Phoenix and Las Vegas were overpriced by 59 and 72% respectively. In Florida Atlantic University's latest reading, those two markets are nearly their previous highs, or nearing their previous highs. As March of 2022, Phoenix is overpriced by 55% and Vegas by 60%. Even worse, Phoenix is once again among the US leaders for new construction. If a housing correction does come, Phoenix could quickly become oversupplied. By reading this last clip, what that tells you is again, if you're paying attention to what's happened in the past historically, it's almost happening again, even in a much expanded capacity. If you measure it by those indicators, if you're looking at how new construction is being overbuilt in certain areas, and we know that the two biggest market crashes were in Phoenix and Vegas, were two of the metropolitan cities. And it's even more so now than it was then. Who's right and who's wrong? So all I can say in conclusion today is by reading this article, it's a little scary. I don't know those markets. I just read the data just like everybody else does. I'm a local real estate Houston professional. I've sold over almost 1,000 houses, give or take, over the past 10 years. And I feel like I know the markets. I feel comfortable with Houston. And we're a very diverse economy that separates us locally compared to a lot of the other markets. And I think we're in a great place in Houston. If I'm working with a home buyer, I can advise them where to purchase and feel most confident about my market because I know it. I know the industries that are here, the jobs that are here, the people moving here. Why are they moving here? Where are they purchasing? Who's paying this? Why are they paying that? And explain all the ups and downs that come in the slow periods in Houston and explain the differences versus a slow recessionary period where we're at versus some of the other places in the country. And in my opinion, I'm a great real estate agent in Houston, Texas. And I look forward to working with you. If you have any questions, I'd like to meet with you and go over anything you have. Please subscribe to my page below and I'll give you updates weekly. And I'm going to put my phone number in a link. You can always contact me directly and I'll be happy to speak with you. Thank you.